from President Trump. There was a significant drop in the amount of commercial ships going through the strait. On Sunday, they say there were just 14 crossings. I mean, if you go back to prior to the war, when there were absolutely no restrictions on going through the Strait of Hormuz at all, there are about 140, 150 crossings on a daily basis. So this is pretty significant. It is a sense of deja vu for all of us, really, to a large extent. But as Karen was pointing out there, this is new that President Trump is saying that the U.S. will now put a charge on commercial vessels of 20% of the cargo they are carrying if they're transiting the Strait of Hormuz. And I think, not only we'll have to see how the Iranians react to that in terms of their military posture and their military actions threatening potentially ships more going through the Strait of Hormuz. That has to be a real risk for companies and the crews of the ships in that area. But I think also we have to watch for the reaction from U.S. allies. We know that key European allies of the U.S. are meeting in Paris today about the war in Ukraine. But I think it is almost certain that within the coming hours they are due to hold a press conference on that issue. But I'm sure that reporters want to ask them about their reaction to the fact that the U.S. will charge this toll on any commercial ship, because like the U.S. up until now, they have been deeply opposed to any form of charging ships going through that critical waterway, because before the war, that simply didn't happen.
Karen Travers, Tom Sufi-Burridge, thank you both. And tributes are pouring in for Republican Senator Lindsey Graham after his sudden death over the weekend. His office says the 71-year-old died on Saturday after a brief and sudden illness. Let's bring in ABC political contributor, former Democratic Senator Heidi Heitkamp for more. Hi, Heidi. Thanks for coming on. I know you worked across the aisle from Graham in the Senate. What was that like? What sticks out to you about the kind of person and leader he was?
Well, you always have those few people who are the go-to. Hey, can we get Lindsey? Can we get John? Can we get Susan? And Lindsey was on that list. Probably, I didn't serve with him when he became pretty much an acolyte of President Trump. I served with him when he was still someone who was fairly critical of the president. And so he was somebody that collaborated. He was somebody who would recognize an issue. But probably his greatest strength was his sense of humor. He could take one situation and make everybody in the room laugh by giving just a one-word quote or a two-word quote that just summed up the situation. And so he's very talented. And I think the other thing is he was revered as a trial lawyer. I don't think Brett Kavanaugh would have made it through judiciary without the skills of Senator Graham. And so, he has a legacy, positive and negative, but I think gone too soon. I think everybody would agree that is the situation we're in.
Graham was a fierce ally of President Trump, as you mentioned, but he also broke with him at times. How do you think his relationship with the president reflects broader changes within the Republican Party?
I don't think it does. I think that he was kind of the go-to guy. If a senator needed the president's attention on something, Graham could get his attention. And I think he liked playing that role, kind of the in-between. I'm willing to maybe compromise my sense of good character to kind of get things done. Unfortunately, not much got done. And, one thing that we take from this is we don't know when our time is up. And the time to repair his legacy, back when it was, John McCain and the Three Amigos, and they were clear in terms of their ideology, to a switch to tolerating, I think, bad behavior. Lindsey thought the ends justified the means, and I guess that'll be his legacy going forward.
And what else do you think he leaves behind in terms of legacy on Capitol Hill, given how long he was in the Senate and what a prominent role he had?
Well, I would, maybe a few years ago, I would have said his willingness to work on issues like climate, like immigration. We spent some time with Lindsey trying to figure out what we could do going forward after the 15 bill failed to get any attention in the House. I think he was committed, and I think the one thing about Lindsey Graham that everybody understood was he was very smart and very schooled on the issues, a seasoned politician. He knew how to work a room, he knew how to make people laugh, and he knew how to bring people together. And I think that's definitely a loss for the Senate. But it also, I think a lot of people looked at the last 6 years of career and kind of shook their head and said that the Lindsey Graham that we knew wouldn't have tolerated anyone saying anything mean about John McCain. The Lindsey Graham that we knew would have been principled on issues like Ukraine. And obviously he was negotiating a great deal with Ukraine when he came back and felt like that was a role that he could play with the president. It was a significant role. I think this is a major loss for Ukraine, and somebody's going to have to step up like Lindsey and carry that banner forward. But I think his legacy, it'll take some time to kind of sort it out, because you don't get judged frequently. I mean, you hope you don't get judged by the last 6 years of your tenure, but we know that in the annals of history, frequently it's the last thing that you did that remains on people's minds. And I think it will be seen as somebody who was blindly faithful to this president against former principles that he held. And I think that was always a head scratcher for those of us who served with the old Lindsey Graham.
What are you watching for in the process now to fill his Senate seat?
Well, I think it's interesting. The president clearly announced that he's going to pick his successor, and I think that probably is a fair announcement. He probably will be able to find someone, but the president hasn't been particularly successful in picking general election candidates. So if he picks someone that is ultra MAGA, if he picks someone who will alienate a faction of the conservative Republican base in South Carolina, but is somebody who is conservative who will always do his bidding, I think that ends up being more problematic than it would be if Lindsey were still on the ballot with a record of delivering for South Carolina. And so this complicates it. I always look at where the money is going to go. Clearly, there's going to be a ton of money spent in this immediate primary to see who replaces him on the ballot, and that's going to take away resources from other places where I think the Republicans were hoping that they'd be able to make major investments, like Maine and Ohio, both that look very good for the Democrats right now, Iowa. And I never let anyone forget about Mississippi. I think some early polling out of Mississippi tells you that the Republicans will have to invest their war chest in places where they didn't want to invest war chest, and I think South Carolina becomes one of them.
Heidi Heitkamp, thank you.
You bet. Take care.
Meta is hitting pause on its new AI image tool after days of intense backlash. Meta says it's suspending its feature of Muse that allowed users to generate images using content from public Instagram accounts. SAG-AFTRA criticized the technology, calling it another miscalculation of public sentiment regarding the obvious dangers. Now Meta admits it missed the mark. Axios senior AI reporter Madison Mills is here for more. Hi, Madison. So how does this Muse feature work, and what are the biggest concerns here?
So the feature originally rolled out by Meta allowed anyone to use this separate app Meta has called Meta AI. Within that app, you could tag any public Instagram account. I was just testing it out and tried some random influencers. You can tag their username if they have a public Instagram, and then use their name, their image, their likeness to recreate any style of content that you want. The tagline from Instagram was that you could use it to create, for example, an invitation to a party, something you might think about using as an image on a party full invite or something like that, using that person's likeness. Of course, the massive concern from the majority of users who I spoke with last week was that it could be used for nefarious images, inappropriate content, and of course deep fakes as well. And it seems like that backlash is what ended up pushing Meta to roll back this feature.
How's Meta responding, aside from obviously rolling it back?
Yeah, so we had a Meta statement coming out where they said what you had mentioned, that they missed the mark on this feature. And what I find really interesting is that originally this was complete opt-in. And as they mentioned, their intention was for this to be kind of a creative tool. But at first, everybody who has a public Instagram account was opted into this feature. You had to go into your settings to toggle them off, to choose to opt out of it. Instead of just allowing for users to opt into it, Meta took away this tool entirely. So I think that that's an interesting development, the level of response that they had. It's also going to be interesting to me to see if they have future plans in the works to have any AI generated content that users can create using other people's profiles, or if the pushback that they received from the talent agencies and the studio executives was enough for them to not necessarily push forward with anything at all like this going forward. I also think it's important to note that all AI models train off of user inputted data, so this is something that users should be aware of when they're using AI tools on any platform, not just on Instagram or Facebook.
You mentioned a lot of the backlash stemmed from users having to opt out rather than opt in. How are tech and AI companies navigating those transparency issues?
I would not call the move from the tech companies transparent when it comes to opting in and opting out. You're pretty much opted in no matter what on whatever platform that you're using. And like I mentioned, if you're using a chatbot like ChatGPT or Claude, you are typically automatically opted into your data, your queries, your text being used to train those models to make them better in the future. You have to be the one to be proactive, to know, to go into your settings and change that so that if you don't want your messages being used to make these models better, you have to be the one to proactively do that. I don't know how many people are aware of that necessarily. That's something that a lot of the kind of cyber and security experts who I talk to spend a lot of time trying to educate the population about. It's not something that is necessarily super clear in your interactions with a chatbot, but this has kind of been true of tech for a long time. We all know nobody's reading their terms and conditions, and the tech companies use that to their advantage.
What are you watching for next? Could Meta bring this feature back in a different way?
I'm not just watching for this feature, absolutely looking for that, but also very curious to see what this means about the future of AI generated content. We had the head of Instagram talking about how he doesn't necessarily think that the tools that people use to create content that you see on Instagram should matter, that AI should be viewed as something like a video editing tool that you use. That's not what I'm hearing from users who are pushing back significantly to AI generated content when they can tell that it's AI generated. The problem, of course, is going to be in a future where it continues to be increasingly difficult to tell what is and isn't AI generated content. So I think seeing how these platforms sort of position themselves to meet consumers where they are with the level of AI pushback we're having, and then also meet the kind of content world that we're in that is increasingly being kind of defined by AI tools, how they navigate that tightrope, I think it's going to be an interesting thing to monitor in our coverage.
All right, Axios senior AI reporter Madison Mills. Madison, thank you. Coming up, the deadly fire at a popular Thailand bar. What survivors are saying about people being trapped inside.
And stream on Disney Plus and Hulu. You're watching America's #1 streaming news. Keep streaming with ABC News Live.
Welcome back to ABC News Live. First, an investigation is underway after a pilot died while fighting a Colorado wildfire. Authorities say the pilot was helping firefighters with the Gold Mountain fire when the plane crashed into a reservoir. The Gunnison County Sheriff's Office says divers have recovered the body. Officials say the fire has grown to about 57 square miles and is 13% contained. And officials are investigating what caused a passenger to be nearly sucked out of a Ryanair flight midair. Officials say a cabin window dislodged after takeoff, causing the cabin to decompress. Now, a similar incident happened on a Southwest flight due to engine debris shattering that window. Now, investigators are looking into whether engine issues caused the Ryanair incident. Gio Benitez has more on the investigation.
This morning, growing questions amid an international investigation into this terrifying incident. A passenger partially sucked out of the plane window in midair. The Boeing 737 jet was en route from Greece to Germany Friday morning when the airline, Ryanair, says the window dislodged shortly after takeoff. The cabin quickly decompressing, pulling a 61-year-old man seated next to the window toward the opening. Sources telling ABC News part of his upper body was outside of the plane, his wife grabbing his legs, preventing him from being completely sucked out. As the jet made an emergency landing back in Greece, passengers donning oxygen masks and holding hands.
We can see one of the blades in the engine that you can see as you look at the front broke free, went out the side of the engine and hit the fuselage right at the window where this person was seated.
Miraculously, the man survived and was taken to an intensive care unit where sources say he is being treated for injuries. This scare follows a similar incident involving a Southwest Airlines flight in 2018. A New Mexico woman was killed after debris from the engine shattered a cabin window, pulling her partially out. That flight also a Boeing 737 using that same engine. Boeing saying in a statement that it is aware of this latest incident and is in contact with Ryanair.
The real question is, was this isolated to just this engine, or does it affect